The weird thing about conservatives is that they're 20 years behind, and then they rehearse or redo something that other people did at a point where it was in fact dangerous and relevant. And then they proceed to believe or at least tell you that they were the first one to do it and then pat themselves on the back for doing it. And,
I was
you
hoping
know,
you were going to get to that because he acted in this interview like he invented World War II revisionism, and like it's this like he's the first guy to have a nuanced view of the Holocaust.
or anything about the Second World War, not just the Holocaust. It's just absurd. And like so I was listening to Daryl Colby. He seemed to be some sort of DOJ contractor. And I mean, you can claim that he's a Fed or he's whatever. Maybe that's true. I don't know. I mean, I'll just examine what he says directly. But he did this thing on the Israeli Palestinian question, and he starts bragging about reading secondary literature. He was like, at first, I just read 2 books, and then I must have read 60 books on. Okay. Reading a bunch of secondary literature, I mean, that is fine. And that's not actual, that's not history. I mean, if you want to offer your own interpretation of something, that's great, but that's not Ronkian history exactly. Like reading secondary literature is, of course, like a history of the conflict or someone's article or whatever. You're reading someone's interpretation of it. Actual history writing is going to an archive or going to a archaeological dig or talking to someone directly or something. So I'm not terribly impressed that you read a bunch of books and then you want to say like, oh, I want to give this nuanced view of both sides and put myself in their shoes. Yeah, like, dude, this is what everyone has been doing for before Ranka. I mean, this is just not new. And the fact that you're discovering this is kind of precious. It's like, I don't, it's like literally a child rolling a can and thinking that it invented the wheel. I mean, it's like truly pathetic. I listened to about 30 minutes. This is a while ago, like of the Israel Palestine, and I put it down because I found it just bizarre. It was like him in this voice, like, imagine you're a Jew living in Europe and like they've killed your family and they're attacking you. And it was just this sort of like sentimental garbage. I don't know. Perhaps I did not give it the requisite amount of time. And I just felt like I didn't want to waste any more time on this stuff. There are better historians working on this, most of which are left wing historians, to be honest. And I'm just was not terribly impressed by it. Perhaps I should give it another look. And then he talked about the Jonestown cult. So it's a fascinating thing. And he's like, did you know that most of the victims were black? And did you know that it was this left wing group? It wasn't like a Christian fundamentalist, only a Christian fundamentalist. It was actually a left wing. And it's like, yeah, I actually did know that. That's not new information. And maybe it's something you could bring to the fore to talk to people. But this idea that books have not been written on this subject is just absurd. And he supposedly listened to all of the files from Jim Jones' sermons. Okay, that's great. That is doing history, but what are you doing? You're either uncovering new material. So this material is in the public domain. That's not anything. Like you're either uncovering new material in order to advance our understanding of facts, or you are offering a new interpretation. But if you're not doing either of those things, you're sort of entertaining people, and that is totally fine. Totally fine. Maybe we need more of that. But don't claim that this is somehow brave or new. or like no one's willing to do this or something. I mean, it's like they're so sheltered and ignorant conservatives that they again, it's like they roll a can across the ground and they think they've invented the wheel. I mean, it is like truly pathetic, if maybe a little bit precious, how like sheltered they are. But that's actually a charitable reading. I think they know that other people have done this work and they're just trying to go and like take credit and signal to everyone how brave they are, that they're like the only one willing to engage in World War II revisionism. Ever heard of AJP Taylor? MartyrMade. Ever heard of that guy? I mean, even Niall Ferguson, who I believe worked mostly with secondary literature, but like he wrote a revisionist history of World War One like 30 years ago in terms of the causes of the war, and he actually blamed Britain. It caused a bit of a scandal.
David
I just
Irving, never heard of that guy.
right. Well, then there are more
Who's that?
controversial figures. David
Yeah,
Irving,
yeah.
No,
also
I'm sure he
Pat.
would spit David Irving's name. He
He,
would like call him like a terrible anti-Semite.
Hmm.
yes, while he basically is going to say a half baked version of what David Irving said. How about Pat
That
Buchanan?
he never that he
Did he
never
mention Pat
actually had the like
Buchanan?
no.
No.
And he would never have like the integrity to go and do the research the way a David Irving would.
David Irving went to a bunch of archives, and David Irving traveled the world acquiring documents, and from what I can tell, examined the documents skeptically. Like who wrote this, who published it? Is it reliable? Did they have an interest in saying this? I mean, I just can't even with these people. It's like the best you could say about them is that they're highly naive. And the worst you can say about them is that they're actually uh they're actually kind of like malevolent in the sense that, I mean, it's this thing that I've talked about a while where it's like these conservatives have now discovered race realism, and they're going to be like, oh, look, like, why are so many people, why did no one talk about this? Why am I the only one talking about this? We need to start talking about it. And it's like, people have been doing this for a century. And more obviously, people have been doing this for the last 30 years. You give them zero credit and you pretend that they don't exist, and then you offer this like half-baked version of what they did. It's just infuriating.
It's a lot like Candace Owens is doing right now also.
Yeah. It is a conservative mentality. They are a race of midwits who act like this. And there's no getting around it. This is another thing that I would say, because one guy who's been a kind of, conversation partner and critic, I remember Xbox Live, responded. He was like, well, isn't it sort of good that they're finally giving this to the normies and things like that? And I guess you could say it's somewhat good, but, I'm ambivalent about this whole phenomenon. But this is what I would say. When the rubber hit the road, and I'll go back to my dear friend Ann Coulter. When the rubber hit the road with Ann Coulter, when she was at a point where what she was saying mattered, what she was saying was hyper relevant and inconsequential, she never talked about immigration. She talked about maybe like Muslims immigrating here as and they're going to come and blow up your dog or something. She blew her wad on supporting the Iraq war. And once immigration, the impact of immigration has been baked into the cake. Someone like Ann Coulter is like, we've got to stop immigration or we won't have a country. And it's like, you realize this is over. You realize that, like, even if you halted all immigration, the white majority is done. If you halted immigration, you might put it off by like 20 years or maybe even less. So you're once something is in a way no longer relevant, you retreat into that space and then like talk about how consequential it is. And I would argue that World War II, like it's always worthwhile talking about this, the most deadly conflict in human history. But World War II is actually much, much less relevant now than it has ever been. When after Schindler's List was released in, say, 1994 or thereabouts, and then Saving Private Ryan some 5 years later, and leading into the Bush administration, the direct callbacks to Nazis in the Second World War and another Munich and all this stuff that occurred in the W administration. That was a time in which like World War II revisionism would have been consequential. You might have been fired for doing it, in fact. Fast forward to 2024, 30 years after, say, Schindler's List, or 25 years after Saving Private Ryan, just using the movies as a way of a metric for understanding the popular imagination. 20 years after the Iraq War debate, it's just a lot less relevant. And so you're like retreating into this safe zone where you can be edgy. Like no one's going to get fired for like Egyptian pyramid revisionism. Like all of that is very interesting and curious and worth talking about and whatever, but it's not relevant. It's not really, I mean, it's worth doing, but you're not really impacting the world. And I just feel like conservatives do this. It's like once something has been resolved and is no longer an issue, they kind of go back into that safe, merely academic zone and start having these controversial opinions, knowing that it's never going to really affect anything. So I don't even want to be attacking them like this. I do this sort of reluctantly, but I just the sort of smugness and willful ignorance is just breathtaking.